House of the Dragon adapting Fire and Blood is like playing Connect the Dots. Fire and Blood is roughly 700 pages long and covers about 150 years of the Targaryen dynasty. While there's a lot of stuff there, there's also a lot of gaps. When you're reading the other A Song of Ice and Fire books, you're zoomed much closer in. You're seeing the dialogue, seeing inner thoughts of characters. But with Fire and Blood, you're zoomed much further out. You see the dots, so you know what the big picture looks like, even if you don't have all these lines connecting everything like you would in a novel with dialogue and internal thoughts. But any television series, it's going to be much more zoomed in, with dialogue that paints a more detailed picture that we didn't have when we only saw the big dots in Fire and Blood. House of the Dragon had a Herculean time trying to adapt something like this to screen. Season 1, I think they did an exemplary job, and it's worth mentioning, Season 1 covers one chapter in Fire and Blood. So getting back to our connect the dots metaphor, they had a lot of lines they had to draw, or stuff they had to make up to flesh out the episodes. Season 2, I'm seeing a lot of people who are pretty frustrated with it. Imagine, if you would, someone adapting the Lord of the Rings books into a TV show. They might use some of Tolkien's original material, but they're also going to make their own stuff up. Well, Rosie didn't have much of a role in the book, so we're going to have to give her stuff to do. Maybe she leaves the Shire before Sam and Frodo, so she sees all this Kingsfoil, and well, Kingsfoil is a weed, so she thinks, I have to pluck all of it and throw it away. Then you get to the part where Frodo gets stabbed with a Morgul blade, and they need Kingsfoil to put on the wound. Uh-oh. House of the Dragon is not only connecting the dots, but they're also adding their own dots along the way, and they're missing some of the dots that were there before. So instead of a dog, we're now getting a dog with 5 legs and no head. This show hasn't been all bad. There have been some things that weren't in Fire and Blood that I think were interesting additions. Kristen and Alicent doing the nasty is fine. It adds an extra layer of hypocrisy to both characters that makes them feel more real. And I've seen some people who hated Kristen before, now they really hate him. But other people like him suffering from PTSD from battles, which also humanizes him more. And it doesn't contradict the book. In Fire and Blood, we're told Jace suggested the sowing of the dragon seeds, but in the show, he's against the idea, as it hits a little closer to home for him being illegitimate. That does contradict the book, but it's not a big deal. We still get most of the dragon seeds, and it gives Jace more character stuff to chew on, which is good. On paper, I don't mind the idea of Alice Rivers screwing with Daemon. In the book, we're flat out told Daemon was immune to her sorcery, but none of Gildane's sources would have any way of knowing that for sure, so I'm fine with that embellishment. But if I had to sum up everyone's complaints about this season, it's the glacial pacing. Season 1 seems to end by kicking off the dance. Aemon has killed Luke, Rhaenyra has fire and blood in her eyes, heads are gonna roll. Well, maybe, at some point, in Season 3. While I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, I wonder if they wanted to really draw out the events of this series, because they think people are going to pay for it anyway, so we might as well decompress it. Let's get an entire season out of it if we prolong some of the major events. That's what it feels like, since in this season of 8 episodes, we got, checks math, a battle, and a whole lot of characters angsting about the war. George R.R. Martin is strongly against war, so on the one hand, characters trying to prevent this war and screaming internally, that feels true to his anti-war stance. But on the other hand, you're making a show about a war. That's what people came to see. They don't mind complex characters who have complex feelings about the things they're doing, but they also want to actually see some doing, action, something happening. We spend an entire season with Daemon tripping on Weirwood Vision, an entire season with Rhaenyra hemming and hawing on Dragonstone. After the end of Season 1, people were ready to see some blood and guts, and this whole season felt like somebody was pumping the brakes, telling us we'll get blood and guts in another 2 years. I think part of the problem is we have fewer episodes this season, but even with only 8 episodes, and even if they wanted to stretch out this story more, I still think there's a way they could have made lemonade out of lemons. Episode 1, Jace is at Winterfell trying to secure alliances with the Northmen and his mother. I was insanely excited for this, as Kragan Stark is my favorite character in the dance, and we get maybe 3 minutes with him. Spend an entire episode at Winterfell. People like the Starks, they like the Wall. Let's spend some time up there. I know Sarah Snow, Kragan's illegitimate sister, was mentioned by Mushroom in Fire and Blood, and a lot of what Mushroom says should be taken at less than face value. Maybe she doesn't even exist, as it appears she doesn't in the show. But Mushroom was also the one who alleged Alice Rivers was an immortal witch, and that seems to be true in this series, so why not put Sarah Snow in? A lordling who has trouble keeping his betrothal vow, we've seen that before, and it makes these characters feel more three-dimensional. I haven't really liked how basically everyone on Team Green is evil except Helena, and everyone on Team Black is pure and nice except for Damon. That's an oversimplification, but basically, yeah, I hate that. It makes it far too easy, and as we've already established, Martin is anti-war. Having almost everyone on one side be nice and everyone on the other be mean is very cut and dried. But if it's more gray, it makes the who am I rooting for question a lot harder to answer. If Jace is betrothed to Bela and then he sleeps with the first chick he sees at Winterfell, that's a human foible that makes him feel more real. Why did we have to drag Damon's vision quest out an entire season? That seems like something that could have taken an episode. Season 1, you had the Black Council and the Green Council, and you were only spending time with about half the cast in each of those episodes. Now that most of our characters have split up, you could have focused an episode on Damon. Do all the visions it took a full season for him to suffer through in one episode. Then, if you need to keep him at Harrenhal while other plot stuff moves forward, have him help rally armies for Rhaenyra once he's got his head screwed on straight. Some of this, logistically, would have been difficult to manage, but when everyone who is watching the show is looking at their watches, okay, we get it, more spooky Weirwood stuff, they were getting tired of this in episode 3. By episode 8, it is well past time for some forward momentum. Then you have the stuff the show is making up that really perplexes book readers. Spoilers, maybe, depending on what direction the show goes, it may not matter if I spoil the book. Aegon's dragon may or may not be dead, even though it has huge stuff to do later on. Aemon betrays Aegon, which on the one hand I find interesting, but on the other hand it makes me scratch my head at how the series is going to handle some other events from the book. Apparently Aegon and Aemon's brother Daeron does exist in the show, even though we haven't seen him. But Aegon's son Maelor, who the show has cut, is killed. Daeron burns the town responsible, which is him at his worst, when he is otherwise considered honorable and just. But no Maelor, how are they going to do that? Are they going to do that? I see no reason to bring Daeron into the show if they're not going to do some town burning. But my biggest gripe, I've been saying it all season, it seems like they've chosen not to bring in Nettles, who is the last of Rhaenyra's dragon seeds we have yet to see. I talked before about how Daemon's relationship with Nettles could have been an opportunity to show Daemon's softer side, and if his visions are meant to force him to confront his awful behavior, maybe that's no longer necessary. I still like the character of Nettles, and spoilers, maybe, I just don't like the idea of replacing her with Rhaena. I've said before, when these shows take weird liberties like this, they're only shooting HBO in the foot, because HBO wants to do a whole universe of A Song of Ice and Fire spinoffs and prequels and the like. And Rhaena and Bela, they have stuff to do in the reign of Aegon III. They might not ever do a show about his reign, but it's certainly going to be a lot harder to do if they take characters who are kind of important from that time period and give them stories of characters from this time period. Taking this back to my connect the dots metaphor, I wish this show wasn't inventing so much stuff whole cloth. They feel like Alicent needs stuff to do, but then it feels like they don't take into account how her doing stuff is going to impact other things that are supposed to happen. Or they just get rid of a character who they very easily could have put in there. There's a gigantic time jump in season 1 where you could have pushed up the births of Aegon and Helena's children. Not sure why they didn't think of that. I really like season 1 a lot, so it hurts me to say this, but I do worry about the future of this show. It reminds me of Game of Thrones. Season 1 was a strong adaptation of A Game of Thrones, but even early on, you can still see the seeds of what that show will become. And I really hope this series isn't on a course to do what that show did.